wage slavery, which they regarded as not very different from chattel slavery. In fact, this was such a popular view that it was actually a slogan of the Republican Party, that the only difference between working for a wage and being a slave is that working for a wage is supposedly temporary.
They and their families were as effectively held and immobilized on those farms in the 1890s and into the 1900s as their grandparents had been held as slaves in the same places before the Civil War. Almost all sharecroppers were never able to pay back the debts to the landowners on whose land they worked. They effectively were peons, even though they were not called that at the time.
Freedom is a spectrum, with chattel slaves on the left and slave masters on their right. The foundation of the wage-slave relationship is the economic dependency of the slave on the master. Wage slavery changes the form of compensation from food and shelter to money, which can theoretically be used to purchase food and shelter. Although free in name, most Americans are broke, in debt, live paycheck to paycheck, and couldn't walk away from their jobs without losing their homes. The average worker today works 24% more than a 14th century peasant. In 1 year, this is the equivalent of an additional 2 months of work. Freedom to most Americans is largely an illusion. So how can the working masses win back their time and increase their freedom? Well, they can bargain for better working conditions, but at the end of the day, employers have no incentive to offer this given the increasingly competitive labor market, and it doesn't solve the fundamental master-slave dynamic caused by the economic dependence that's the root cause of all of this. The closest we have to a silver bullet is a universal basic income, an unconditional cash transfer that every citizen gets that provides just enough to pay for basic living expenses. This removes the master-slave dynamic and gives workers the freedom to walk away from their jobs and spend their time how they wish. Sweden doesn't have a basic income, but they're a great example of how a generous safety net can promote greater risk-taking and entrepreneurship. Freedom in name is not the same as freedom in reality. Just ask Frederick Douglass.
You have owners. They own you. They own everything. They own all the important land. They own and control the corporations. They've long since bought and paid for the Senate, the Congress, the state houses, the city halls. They got the judges in their back pockets. And they own all the big media companies, so they control just about all of the news and information you get to hear. They got you by the balls. They spend billions of dollars every year lobbying to get what they want. Well, we know what they want. They want more for themselves and less for everybody else. But I'll tell you what they don't want. They don't want a population of citizens capable of critical thinking. They don't want well-informed, well-educated people capable of critical thinking. They're not interested in that. That doesn't help them. That's against their interest. That's right. They don't want people who are smart enough to sit around the kitchen table and figure out how badly they're getting fucked by a system that threw them overboard 30 fucking years ago. They don't want that. You know what they want? They want obedient workers. Obedient workers. People who are just smart enough to run the machines and do the paperwork, and just dumb enough to passively accept all these increasingly shittier jobs with the lower pay, the longer hours, the reduced benefits, the end of overtime, and the vanishing pension that disappears the minute you go to collect it. And now they're coming for your Social Security money.
Being forced to be something like slaves, they argued that if you're say a journeyman, a craftsman, and you sell your product, you're selling what you produced. If you're a wage earner, you're selling yourself, which is deeply offensive.
And I think that splitting hairs about what's slavery, what's involuntary servitude, what's forced labor, is a distracting exercise. The reality is, millions of black people in remote parts of the South could not leave the farms they were being held on. If they did, they were subject to arrest by the sheriff, and if they were arrested, they would then be returned to the very same farms, oftentimes in chains, receiving nothing. That is slavery. That's a form of slavery.
We're going to need to go ahead and move you downstairs into storage B.
No,
we have some new people coming in, and we need all the space we can get.
But there's no space.
So if you could just go ahead and pack up your stuff and move it down there, that would be terrific.
I was
okay?
I could stay.